Ancient Egypt is one of the most captivating and enduring civilizations in human history. Spanning over 3 millennia, from around 3100 BCE to 30 BCE, it witnessed the rise and fall of powerful dynasties, the construction of monumental wonders, and the development of profound cultural and intellectual traditions. In this narrative, we will journey through the major periods of Egyptian history, from its prehistoric origins and unification under the first pharaohs, through the ages of pyramids and empire, to eras of foreign rule, highlighting the achievements in governance, architecture, science, writing, religion, and daily life that defined each era. Along the way, we will meet some of ancient Egypt's most notable figures: Narmer, Khufu, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramses II, and Cleopatra VII, and see how Egypt interacted with neighboring civilizations like Nubia, Mesopotamia, Persia, Greece, and Rome. We'll conclude by exploring Egypt's lasting intellectual and cultural legacy, including how its innovations, from hieroglyphic writing and monumental architecture to solar calendars and religious concepts, influenced later civilizations and even modern thought. Join us as we travel back in time to the Nile Valley and uncover the story of ancient Egypt, an immortal legacy written in stone and papyrus. Pre-dynastic Egypt and early dynastic unification. Prehistory, circa 2686 BCE. Long before the pharaohs, the Nile River Valley nurtured small communities that would eventually give rise to ancient Egypt. By around 5000 BCE, semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers in northeastern Africa began to settle in the Nile Valley, drawn by its fertile floodplain. Over centuries, they transitioned to agriculture, cultivating wheat and barley and domesticating cattle, which supported permanent villages along the Nile. These early Nilotic farmers developed distinct cultures. Archaeologists identify phases like Badarian and Naqada, crafted pottery, and engaged in regional trade, exchanging gold, ivory, hardwood, and incense from Africa for Egyptian grain and linen. By the late pre-dynastic period, 4th millennium BCE, technological and social advances were accelerating. Irrigation techniques improved farming yields. Artisans worked copper tools and faience jewelry, and crucially, a writing system emerged. Indeed, by roughly 3200 to 3100 BCE, the earliest hieroglyphic writing appears, inscribed on pottery and labels, a momentous invention that Egyptians would use for over 3.5 millennia. The invention of writing allowed the recording of religious rituals, economic transactions, and royal achievements, helping to catalyze a more complex bureaucratic society. As settlements grew, they coalesced into regional proto-kingdoms in Upper, Southern, and Lower Northern Egypt. Around 3100 BCE, these lands were unified under a single ruler. Narmer, sometimes identified with the legendary Men's, is traditionally credited as the first king to unite Upper and Lower Egypt. A famous carved artifact known as the Narmer palette shows this early king wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt and ritually smiting enemies, a symbolic depiction of unification. Whether Narmer achieved unification through conquest or more gradual political integration, by the dawn of the First Dynasty, Egypt had become one kingdom ruled by a divine king, pharaoh. Early dynastic pharaohs established a capital at Memphis near the Nile Delta and founded strong institutions. The king was worshipped as an embodiment of the hawk god, Horus. Writing and administration were organized to record the state's granaries and decrees, and the first centralized bureaucracy took shape. The concept of kingship as a sacred office, with the pharaoh responsible for maintaining Maten, cosmic order, was already in place, laying the ideological foundation for Egypt's governance for millennia. In this era, Egyptian artistic conventions and religious rituals also began to crystallize. Royal tombs at Abydos and Saqqara, though simple compared to later monuments, demonstrate the burgeoning belief in the afterlife and the use of funerary offerings to sustain the dead. By 2700 BCE, Egypt was poised to enter an age of monumental ambition and cultural florescence. The Old Kingdom. Age of the Pyramid Builders circa 2686 to 2181 BCE. The Old Kingdom represents the first golden age of ancient Egypt, a time of strong central government, economic prosperity, and the construction of the most iconic symbols of Egyptian civilization, the pyramids. Spanning Egypt's 3rd to 6th dynasties, the Old Kingdom saw pharaohs wield unprecedented authority as god-kings, backed by an efficient bureaucracy of viziers, scribes, and tax collectors. The capital at Memphis flourished as a political and religious center. Pharaohs commanded resources to undertake massive state projects, the greatest of which was royal tomb construction on a scale never seen before or since. The Great Pyramid of Giza, right, and the Great Sphinx, foreground, stand as lasting testaments to Old Kingdom engineering and religious devotion. Built in the mid-3rd millennium BCE for Pharaoh Khufu, the Great Pyramid originally rose approximately 146 meters high and remained the tallest human-made structure for over 3,800 years. The Pyramid Age began with King Djoser, 3rd dynasty, who around 2650 BCE commissioned a revolutionary monument at Saqqara, the Step Pyramid, designed by his architect Imhotep. This tiered stone pyramid, the first large cut-stone structure in history, demonstrated the leap from traditional mud brick mastabas to durable stone tombs reaching toward the heavens. It set off a pyramid-building boom. In the 4th dynasty, pharaohs perfected the art of pyramid construction on the Giza Plateau. Khufu, also known by the Greek name Cheops, built the Ma'aretat, the Great Pyramid of Giza, around 2560 BCE. This colossal tomb, containing roughly 2.3 million limestone blocks, precisely cut and fitted, was the largest building on Earth at the time of its completion. Flanking it were the slightly smaller pyramids of Khufu's son, Khafre, whose pyramid complex included the enigmatic Great Sphinx, and grandson Menkaure. The Giza pyramids, geometrically perfect and astronomically aligned, required centralized planning and the labor of thousands of workers, mostly farmers during the Nile's flood season, who toiled to ensure their divine ruler's eternal life. These pyramids remain an engineering marvel. Khufu's Great Pyramid, originally 146 meters tall, was so precisely constructed that its base is nearly perfectly level and its orientation to true north is within a tiny fraction of a degree. The building of pyramids was more than an architectural feat. It reflects Old Kingdom society's religion and governance. Egyptians believed the pharaoh's soul needed a proper vessel, the pyramid, and grave goods to ascend to the afterlife among the gods. Thus, immense state resources were devoted to these projects. Inside late Old Kingdom pyramids appeared the Kampas or pyramid texts, the earliest known religious inscriptions meant to protect the king's spirit. Apart from pyramids, Old Kingdom pharaohs built sun temples to the sun god Ra and opulent mastaba tombs for nobles, indicating a sophisticated administration that could organize large workforces and craft workers, stonemasons, engineers, artists. Governance in the Old Kingdom was highly centralized under the pharaoh's divine rule. A famous official, Imhotep, who designed Djoser's Step Pyramid, exemplifies the educated elite, as vizier and high priest, that managed state affairs such as irrigation, labor deployment, and taxation of crop surpluses. The pharaoh was seen as the guarantor of the Nile's annual flood and agricultural fertility. When floods were good and prosperity reigned, the king was credited with maintaining cosmic order. The Old Kingdom's relative isolation and stability meant few military campaigns abroad, but there were trade expeditions. For instance, to Lebanon for cedar wood and to Sinai for turquoise and copper. Egypt was largely self-sufficient thanks to the Nile, which produced ample grain to feed the populace and fund grand projects. Daily life for most people in this era revolved around farming, tied to the Nile's cycles. Peasants cultivated wheat and barley, tended livestock, and paid taxes, often in grain, to support the state and temple cults. They lived in mud brick houses in villages along the river. During the flood season when fields were underwater, Many laborers were conscripted for building projects, like the pyramids, which may have also been a form of employment and sustenance provided by the state. Egyptian society stratified during the Old Kingdom, the pharaoh and royal family at the top, followed by nobles and high officials, then skilled artisans and scribes, a growing class thanks to literacy and hieroglyphs, and the vast majority of farmers. Impressively, by the Old Kingdom, the Egyptians had already developed many of the intellectual facets of their culture. A 365-day solar calendar to regulate farming, which would millennia later inspire the Julian calendar introduced by Julius Caesar. Basic medical and anatomical knowledge recorded in treatises, the oldest medical texts date to the end of this period, and mathematical skills, including early geometry to survey land boundaries after floods and to engineer pyramid angles. Art in the Old Kingdom achieved a canonical form. Statues and reliefs were formal, idealized, and focused on the afterlife, such as the serene statues of pharaohs like the famous seated statue of Khafra. The Old Kingdom eventually declined in the 22nd century BCE due to a combination of factors. Decentralization of power, as nomarch governors in distant provinces became hereditary and less controlled by the king, led to reduced royal authority. Climate may have played a role too. Evidence suggests lower Nile floods and famine toward the end of the 6th dynasty, undermining the pharaoh's claim to guarantee prosperity. After the death of King Pepi II, who reportedly ruled over 90 years, the central government fragmented. The period that followed, known as the First Intermediate Period circa 2181 to 2055 BCE, saw competing local dynasties and a decline in monumental building. Yet Egyptian culture proved resilient, and before long, strong leaders in Thebes would reunify the land, ushering in a renaissance of Egyptian power. The Middle Kingdom, Reunification and Renaissance, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE. The Middle Kingdom period was a renaissance in Egyptian civilization. After a phase of division and turmoil, Egypt was reunited under a strong central government, leading to a flourishing of arts, literature, and public works. The story begins with Mentuhotep II, a Theban king who around 2055 BCE defeated rival claimants in the north and reunified Egypt, inaugurating the 11th dynasty. He and his successors established the Middle Kingdom, often considered Egypt's classical age, a time of comparatively just kingship, expanded trade, and cultural achievements. The capital during the 12th dynasty moved to a new city called Ichtawi, likely near the Fayum oasis in the north, signaling a shift from Thebes while maintaining unity. Middle Kingdom pharaohs worked to repair the damage of the previous chaos. They reasserted central authority, reorganized nomes, provinces, and curbed the power of local governors. They also undertook major irrigation and agricultural projects, including reclaiming land in the Fayum for cultivation. The result was renewed prosperity. Art from this era often emphasizes the ideal of the caring, wise, good shepherd king. While Old Kingdom rulers had been viewed as remote god-kings, Middle Kingdom literature sometimes portrays pharaohs expressing concern for the well-being of the people, suggesting a subtly different concept of kingship that balanced divinity with practical responsibility. One hallmark of the Middle Kingdom was literature. Some of the finest Egyptian literary texts were written in this period, reflecting a newfound fluency in language and perhaps a broader audience among the elite. Works like The Tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor, The Story of Sinuhe, and The Instruction of Amenemhat, a wisdom text, were composed during or about the Middle Kingdom. These works suggest an introspective society. For example, Sinuhe tells of a courtier's adventures in exile and joyful return to Egypt, revealing pride in the Egyptian way of life and the mercy of the pharaoh. The Middle Kingdom also introduced the first extensive use of coffin texts, spells inscribed on coffins to guide common people, not just royals, in the afterlife. This democratization of the afterlife beliefs indicates that more Egyptians had access to funerary rituals once reserved for kings. Architecturally, Middle Kingdom pharaohs did build pyramids, though smaller and often now badly eroded, due to cores of mud brick. Notably, Senusret II and Senusret III of the 12th dynasty built pyramids and developed new pyramid towns. Senusret III is remembered as a warrior king who led campaigns south into Nubia and built a series of massive mud brick fortresses along the Nile to secure Egypt's southern border. Middle Kingdom Egypt indeed expanded its sparky interactions with Nubia. Rich in gold mines and resources, Egyptian armies pushed into Nubia, which Egyptians called Kush, and annexed territory up to the Second Cataract, building forts like Buhin to control trade and the flow of Nubian gold. To the northeast, Egypt re-established contact with the Near East, trading with Byblos for cedar, sending expeditions to Sinai for turquoise, and perhaps diplomatic exchanges with city-states in Syria and Canaan. Egyptian goods, beads, scarabs, pottery, found in Canaan and the Levant show lively commerce. Some pharaohs like Senusret II also fostered trade as far as Punt, the Red Sea trading partner on the Somali-Eritrean coast, for incense and exotic products. Meanwhile, Queen Hatshepsut E's famous expedition to Punt would come in the next period, but an early Middle Kingdom queen, Neferu Sobek Neferu, notably ruled as the first certain female pharaoh at the end of the 12th dynasty, setting a precedent for Hatshepsut a few centuries later. In art and culture, the Middle Kingdom produced exquisitely crafted jewelry, such as the royal treasures found at Dashur, refined portrait sculpture, with pharaohs' faces often shown with realistic, brooding expressions, e.g., the striking, introspective statues of Senusret III, and continued advances in science and mathematics. Egyptian mathematicians used practical arithmetic for surveying and accounting. The Rind mathematical papyrus, copied in the Second Intermediate Period from a Middle Kingdom original, shows knowledge of geometry and algebraic problem-solving. Medicine also advanced. The Akhenaten gynecological papyrus. From this era is one of the oldest medical texts detailing diagnostics and treatments for women's health issues, indicating a scientific approach to medicine. Egyptians observed the stars and refined their calendar. One Middle Kingdom innovation was setting a 365-day civil calendar, 12 months of 30 days plus 5 festival days, that, while not accounting leap years, shows their astronomical awareness. Everyday life in the Middle Kingdom likely improved for common folk compared to the instability before. Farmers still toiled in fields along the Nile, but irrigation improvements and the state's renewed stability meant more reliable harvests. Middle Kingdom tomb models, small wooden dioramas placed in tombs, give charming glimpses of daily life. There are scenes of peasants tilling fields, women grinding grain or brewing beer, and boats on the Nile transporting goods, all placed in tombs to serve the deceased in the next life. These models and tomb paintings indicate a vibrant daily life centered on the agricultural cycle, family, and community activities. Notably, beliefs in the afterlife had broadened. Many middle-class individuals now desired their own proper burials with magical figurines, shabtis, to do work for them in the afterlife, a practice that grew more popular in subsequent periods. After the long and prosperous 12th dynasty, the central authority waned again during the 13th dynasty. Egypt entered the Second Intermediate Period, circa 1650 to 1550 BCE, a time when the Delta region came under the control of the Hyksos Yai, a group of Canaanite-origin rulers. These foreign kings, dynasties 15 to 16, introduced new military technologies to Egypt, notably the horse-drawn chariot and composite bow. The native Egyptian kingdom survived in the south, centered at Thebes, and it's from Thebes that the resistance against the Hyksos would eventually rise. The stage was set for another unification, and with it, Egypt's most glorious age of empire. The New Kingdom, Empire and Innovation, circa 1550 to 1070 BCE. The New Kingdom marks the zenith of ancient Egyptian power and prosperity. After driving out the Hyksos occupiers, Theban pharaohs of the 18th dynasty established a reunited Egypt around 1550 BCE and ushered in a period of strong centralized rule, aggressive military expansion, flourishing arts, and monumental building. Often called Egypt's Imperial Age, the New Kingdom was the era of famous pharaohs: female king, Hatshepsut; the heretic, Akhenaten; the boy king, Tutankhamun; warrior kings like Thutmose III, and Gas, Seti I, and the monumental builder, Ramses II, the Great. During these dynasties, 18th, 19th, and 20th, Egypt became a true international power, extending its influence over Nubia and the Levant, and interacting with other great kingdoms of the Late Bronze Age on equal footing. The New Kingdom began when Ahmose I, a prince of Thebes, completed the War of Liberation against the Hyksos. Around 1550 BCE, Ahmose's forces captured the Hyksos capital of Varis in the Delta, expelling the enemy and reuniting Egypt under native rule. Ahmose and his successors reasserted control over Nubia to the south and pushed Egypt's frontier northeast into the Sinai and Canaan, securing vital trade routes. The 18th dynasty that he founded became one of the most illustrious in Egyptian history. The capital was established at Thebes, modern Luxor, in Upper Egypt, which, along with the old administrative center Memphis, became a locus of power. In Thebes, the pharaohs embarked on grand construction of temples to Amun-Re, their dynastic patron god, at Karnak, and Luxor, turning Thebes into a sacred city of pylons, obelisks, and sphinx-lined avenues. One of the earliest notable rulers of this dynasty was Hatshepsut, 1473 to 1458 BCE, the widow of Thutmose II, who became co-regent for her infant stepson, Thutmose III, and then assumed the full powers of pharaoh. Hatshepsut was a remarkable ruler, a woman who adopted the titles and even depicted herself in the king's traditional male regalia, with false beard, to legitimize her reign. Her reign was largely peaceful and focused on economic prosperity and monumental construction rather than conquest. Hatshepsut famously organized a trading expedition to the land of Punt, likely the Horn of Africa region. On the walls of her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, detailed reliefs show the treasures of Punt brought back by her ships: gold, ebony, ivory, exotic animals, myrrh pas, resin and live myrrh trees to be planted in Egypt. This successful voyage opened up wealth and resources and emphasized trade over war as a source of Egypt's strength during her rule. Hatshepsut also initiated an ambitious house-building program. She renovated the temple complex of Karnak, erecting obelisks and a chapel, built temples throughout Egypt, including a rock-cut shrine at Beni Hassan, and her crowning achievement was her funerary temple at Deir el-Bahri, an elegant terraced structure against the cliffs of western Thebes, with colonnades and courtyards that harmoniously blend with the landscape. This temple celebrated both Amun and Hatshepsut's own divine birth, and it remains one of the architectural gems of Egypt. After Hatshepsut's death, her stepson, Thutmose III, who had grown to become a formidable warrior, took sole power and embarked on a series of military campaigns that greatly expanded Egypt's empire. Under Thutmose III, our 1479 to 1425 BCE, sometimes called the Napoleon of Egypt, the New Kingdom reached its greatest territorial extent. Thutmose III led at least 17 known campaigns into the Levant and Syria, defeating a coalition of Canaanite princes at the Battle of Megiddo, circa 1457 BCE, one of the earliest battles recorded in detail, and eventually reaching the Euphrates River. He subdued the city-states of Syria, and the great kingdom of Mitanni became a vassal ally. Egypt thus secured control or influence over Canaan, Phoenicia, and southern Syria, funneling wealth, tribute of silver, horses, timber, etc., into Egypt's coffers. In Nubia, Egyptian rule was pushed to the Fourth Cataract. Nubia was annexed and administered by an Egyptian viceroy, with garrisons to control its rich gold mines. The empire brought immense wealth and cosmopolitan contacts. Foreign products, Babylonian lapis lazuli, Minoan Mycenaean oil and wine, African incense and ivory, poured into Egypt. The pharaohs of the 18th dynasty styled themselves warrior pharaohs in art, shown leading chariots or smiting captives, to advertise their role as conquerors who maintained Ma'at, order, by vanquishing chaos beyond Egypt's borders. During this time, Egypt engaged in robust diplomacy with other great powers. Correspondence in the Amarna letters, a cache of clay tablets, reveals that pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Akhenaten corresponded on equal terms with the kings of Babylon, Assyria, Mitanni, Hatti, the Hittites, and others, exchanging lavish gifts, diplomatic marriages, and maintaining a balance of power. These letters show Egypt as a major player in an international system, and they also provide glimpses of events like Canaanite city revolts and pleas for Egyptian military aid. The apex of the 18th dynasty was the reign of Amenhotep III, circa 1390 to 1352 BCE, a time of unprecedented wealth and artistic splendor. Amenhotep III built on a grand scale, including the massive expansion of Karnak's temples, a new palace complex at Malkata, and the immense colossi of Memnon statues that guarded his mortuary temple. Egypt was at peace for much of his reign, allowing art and culture to thrive. His time produced exquisite craftsmanship, jewelry, furniture inlaid with African ebony and ivory, and lifelike sculptures. It also saw the prominence of Queen Tiye, Amenhotep's chief wife, who was depicted alongside the king and consulted in affairs, an indication of the high status royal women could attain. However, the later 18th dynasty experienced a dramatic religious upheaval. Amenhotep IV, son of Amenhotep III, ascended the throne and soon changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. He abandoned Egypt's traditional polytheistic religion in favor of worship centered on a single deity, the Aten, the sun disk. Akhenaten is sometimes considered the world's first monotheist, though scholars debate if his Atenism was strict monotheism or a kind of henotheism monolatry. In practice, he elevated Aten, the visible sun disk, above all other gods, even Amun-Re, who had been supreme for centuries. Akhenaten closed or repurposed the temples of other gods and erased the name of Amun from monuments. He also upended tradition by relocating the capital from Thebes to a completely new city in Middle Egypt called Akhenaten, modern Amarna, dedicated to the Aten. Here, he and his famous queen, Nefertiti, who played an active role in the new cult, presided over a revolutionary artistic and cultural period known as the Amarna period. Art became more naturalistic and unconventional. Royal family depictions show elongated heads, potbellies, and intimate family scenes of Akhenaten kissing his daughters under Aten's rays, a stark departure from earlier formality. This style has even led to medical speculation about Akhenaten's appearance, though it may be symbolic rather than literal. The new religion, however, did not long survive Akhenaten's death. His focus on Aten to the exclusion of other gods caused turmoil. The powerful priesthood of Amun was alienated, and subject peoples in the empire sensed weakness. The Amarna letters show Egyptian influence waning during his neglectful reign. After about 17 years, Akhenaten died, circa 1336 BCE, and his religious reforms quickly unraveled. Akhenaten's young son, Tutankhamun, took the throne and soon restored the old order. The boy king, likely guided by advisors like the general Horemheb and official Ai, changed his name to Tutankhamun, signaling the return to the worship of Amun. Under Tutankhamun, circa 1333 to 1323 BCE, the temples of Amun were reopened, the capital shifted back to Memphis and Thebes, and the images and names of the old gods were reinstated. Essentially, Egypt steered back to orthodoxy after the Amarna aberration. Tutankhamun's reign was short, and he died around age 18, leaving little historical impact as a ruler. However, his modern fame is immense because his tomb in the Valley of the Kings was discovered in 1922 almost intact, filled with a wonderful cache of funerary goods. The solid gold mask, gilded coffins, chariots, and myriad treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb have provided historians unparalleled insight into the royal wealth and craftsmanship of the New Kingdom and sparked worldwide fascination. Indeed, the discovery of his tomb revolutionized Egyptology and made King Tut a household name. After the Amarna interlude, the late 18th dynasty and then the 19th dynasty resumed policies of strong rule and military might. A general named Horemheb took power, effectively erasing the Amarna kings from official memory by listing himself as successor of Amenhotep III, and he restored order. He was succeeded by Ramses I, who founded Dynasty 19. His son, Seti I, and especially his grandson, Ramses II, would bring Egypt to new heights of imperial splendor. Seti Eid As Dens Orak 1290 to 1279 BCE, campaigned energetically in Syria-Palestine, fighting the resurgent Hittite Empire for control. He also defeated Libyan tribes in the west and strengthened Egypt's grip on Nubia. Seti was a great builder too. His tomb in the Valley of the Kings is one of the largest and most beautifully decorated, and the hypostyle hall at Karnak, with its forest of giant carved columns, was largely executed in his reign. Ramses II. Ramses the Great, R 1279 to 1213 BCE, stands out as one of the most celebrated and long-lived pharaohs. He ruled about 66 years, living into his 90s and fathering a plethora of children. He boasted over 100 kids and many wives, with his favorite queen being Nefertari, whose elegant tomb in the Valley of the Queens is a masterpiece of art. Ramses II is often considered Egypt's mightiest pharaoh in terms of both war and monument building. Early in his reign, he sought to finish the contest with the Hittites over Syria. This led to the famous Battle of Kadesh, circa 1274 BCE, in which Ramses II's chariots clashed with the Hittite army under Muwatalli II near the Orontes River. The battle was a stalemate. Ramses was caught in a Hittite ambush, and according to his inscriptions, fought valiantly with his personal guard until reinforcements saved the day. Neither side won decisively, but ultimately, after years more of inconclusive fighting, Ramses II negotiated their first recorded peace treaty in Chaktin history, circa 1258 BCE with Hittite king Hattusili III. This Egyptian-Hittite treaty, whose terms survive in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Akkadian cuneiform, declared eternal peace and mutual assistance, even including a clause that they would aid each other if attacked by another power. To seal the alliance, Ramses II took a Hittite princess as a wife. On the construction front, Ramses II was unparalleled. He emblazoned his name across Egypt with countless statues and temples. Many projects initiated under his father Seti I were completed by Ramses, and he added his own. Among his grand achievements, the temples of Abu Simbel in Nubia, 2 rock-cut temples, one for himself, one for Nefertari, with colossal statues 20 meters tall on the facade. The Ramesseum, his mortuary temple near Thebes with towering pylons and statues. Completion of the great hypostyle hall at Karnak. Additions to Luxor Temple, and a new capital city in the Nile Delta named Wa Pi Rameses. House of Ramses. Built on the site of the former Hyksos of Aris, Pi Ramesses became a vibrant city with a palace and military barracks, serving as a base to launch campaigns into Asia, and also conveniently near the Asiatic trade routes. All these works were propaganda in stone, reinforcing Ramses II's image as the chosen of the gods and protector of Egypt. Thanks to such prominence, later generations, even centuries into the Greek period, remembered Ramses II as the great archetypal pharaoh. He may even be the basis for legends. Some speculate he is the pharaoh of the biblical Exodus, though historical evidence for that remains inconclusive. Under Ramses den anden efterfølger, det nye rige magt træder langsomt tilbage. Merneptah, his 13th son, who succeeded him, fought off invasions by Libyans and a mysterious group known as the Sea Peoples, marauding migrants who were causing upheavals across the Mediterranean in the late 13th century BCE. One of Merneptah's inscriptions, the Israel Stele, is notable for being the first mention of Israel in a historical record, indicating Egyptian campaigns in Canaan. The 19th dynasty gave way to the 20th, and another capable warrior, Ramses III, R 1186 to 1155 BCE emerged. Ramses III, often considered the last great pharaoh of the New Kingdom, also faced incursions of Libyans and waves of sea peoples. In his 5th and 8th regnal years, he defeated these sea peoples in 2 major battles, one on land in Canaan and one at the Nile Delta, as depicted at his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. This essentially stopped the sea peoples from entering Egypt, although they devastated other regions. The Hittite Empire fell. Cities in the Levant were destroyed, and the Bronze Age world went into decline. Ramses III's victories protected Egypt's core, but they were costly. Near the end of his reign, an infamous harem conspiracy saw Ramses III assassinated, as later CT scans of his mummy strongly suggest. Subsequent pharaohs of the 20th dynasty, many of whom confusingly took the name Ramses, 4 through 11, were weaker. Corruption and tomb robberies became rife. Workers at Deir el-Medina even staged the first recorded labor strike in history, protesting delayed grain rations. By around 1070 BCE, the New Kingdom era ended as central authority broke down. The high priests of Amun in Thebes held sway in Upper Egypt while other warlords controlled the Delta. Egypt entered another phase of disunity, known as the Third Intermediate Period. Nonetheless, the New Kingdom left an indelible legacy, an Egypt at the height of its wealth, with far-reaching diplomatic ties and cultural influence, magnificent monumental art. The temples and tombs of Thebes remain among the world's great wonders, and religious developments, from the brief experiment of monotheism under Akhenaten to the enduring popularity of deities like Amun, Isis, and Osiris. The New Kingdom also marked the high point of Egypt's interactions with other civilizations. Both in war and peace, Egypt was a central player on the world stage, engaging with Nubians, Syrians, Hittites, Babylonians, and more on a grand scale. The Late Period: Invasions, Revival, and Foreign Rule, circa 1070 to 332 BCE. After the New Kingdom's collapse, Egypt went through centuries of political fragmentation and foreign domination, but also episodes of revival under energetic native rulers. This era, encompassing the Third Intermediate Period circa 1070 to 664 BCE, and the Late Period, 664 to 332 BCE, saw Egypt's fortunes rise and fall as power passed from Libyan pharaohs to Nubian conquerors, then Assyrian invaders, and finally Persian overlords. Despite these upheavals, Egyptian culture proved resilient. The religion, art styles, and administrative practices persisted and even experienced a renaissance during times of renewed independence. The Third Intermediate Period began with power split chiefly between Tanisbats and the Delta, ruled by descendants of Libyan origin generals, the 21st to 22nd dynasties, and Thebes, in the south, where Amun's high priests effectively governed. These Libyan dynasts, such as those of the 22nd dynasty, often called the Libyan pharaohs or Bubastite kings like Shoshenq the As, originally came from Libyan mercenary leaders who had been integrated into Egyptian society during the New Kingdom. Shoshenq I, the biblical Shishak, even conquered as far as Jerusalem in a campaign, showing these rulers could wield military might. However, Egypt remained politically fractured with multiple contemporaneous kings and local rulers, a patchwork of power centers. A major turn came in the 8th century BCE with the rise of the Kaka, Kingdom of Kush, to the south, in Nubia, today's Sudan. The Nubians had adopted many aspects of Egyptian culture over centuries of trade and subjugation, including Amun worship, and established a strong state at Napata. In a dramatic reversal of fortunes, the Nubian king, Pianki, marched north and gradually conquered Egypt around 730 to 720 BCE, unifying the country under what became the Sun 25th dynasty, the so-called Kushite dynasty. For about a century, Nubian pharaohs, notably Paye and his successors Shabaka, Taharka, and Tutankhamun, ruled all of Egypt. They saw themselves as restorers of tradition, reviving old kingdom pyramid building. The Nubian pharaohs built their own pyramids in Kush, and reinforcing the worship of Amun. Pharaoh Taharka Krayan in particular was a formidable ruler who engaged in building projects. He added a giant columned court to Karnak and fought the Assyrians. Under the Kushite dynasty, Egypt experienced a brief but vibrant renaissance. Art and architecture consciously harkened back to past golden ages, creating a revivalist style that modern scholars have dubbed the late period Renaissance. However, this Nubian domination coincided with the expansion of the Assyrian Empire into the Near East. The Assyrians, armed with iron weapons and a professional army, eventually clashed with Egypt. In 671 BCE, the Assyrian king Esarhaddon invaded Egypt, and his son Ashurbanipal captured Thebes in 663 BCE, effectively crushing Nubian resistance. The Assyrians expelled the Kushite pharaoh Tutankhamun and installed vassals in the delta. One of these local princes, Psamtik Ilans of Sais, managed to assert independence from Assyria as that empire waned. Psamtik Hykes, founder of the 26th dynasty in 664 BCE, reunified Egypt once more under native rule, inaugurating this Site period. The 26th dynasty was a last Indian summer of Egyptian prosperity and culture, often considered a deliberate revival of Old Kingdom and New Kingdom glory. Site pharaohs like Psamtik Pharaoh Necho II and Psamtik II reformed the army, even employing Greek mercenaries, evidence of increasing contact with the Greek world, encouraged international trade. Necho II famously commissioned expeditions, possibly including a Phoenician voyage around Africa as later reported by Herodotus, and patronized the arts. Craftsmen produced high-quality statuary imitating classic styles. Temples were restored, and new ones built in traditional forms. During the Saite reign, Egypt's interactions with Greece had intensified. Greeks had already been present as merchants and mercenaries. E.g., a Greek trading colony was established at Naucratis in the Nile Delta in the 7th century BCE. Culturally, this period shows early cross-fertilization. Greek pottery found in Egypt and Egyptian objects found in Greece indicate lively exchange. Pharaoh Apries, Wahipre, even intervened in Palestinian affairs and Libya, showing some foreign ambition. But a new threat loomed from the east, the Persian Empire, under Cambyses II. In 525 BCE, Cambyses invaded and defeated Pharaoh Psamtik III at Pelusium. Egypt became a province, satrapy, of the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire. This was the first Persian period, 27th dynasty. Persian rule was sometimes harsh. Later Egyptian accounts speak bitterly of Cambyses. But the Persians also respected some local customs, styling themselves as pharaohs. They built and restored temples, e.g. Darius I contributed to temple building. Still, Egyptians made several revolts. Brief independence was achieved in 404 to 343 BCE under native dynasties, 28th to 30th. The last native pharaoh, Nektanebo II, of the 30th dynasty, was a competent ruler who built extensively and fought off initial Persian attempts at reconquest. Yet in 343 BCE, the Persians under Artaxerxes III reconquered Egypt, the Second Persian period. This Second Persian rule lasted less than a decade, as world events brought a new conqueror, Alexander the Great, of Macedon. In 332 BCE, Alexander marched into Egypt, welcomed by many as a liberator from Persian rule. At the Oracle of Siwa Oasis, he was pronounced the son of Amun, bolstering his legitimacy as pharaoh. Alexander's arrival marks the end of the late period and the beginning of the Waqqa Greco-Roman Egyptide era. Notably, despite these conquests and foreign dominations in the late period, core Egyptian culture remained vibrant. The Egyptians continued their religious practices devotedly. The late dynastic and Persian periods show flourishing of animal cults, such as the Apis bull cult and mass ibises and cats mummified as votive offerings. And temples in places like Dendera and Philae continued rituals without interruption. Some of the most exquisite temple art and building actually comes from the tail end of Egypt's independence. The 30th dynasty temples built by Nektanebo I and II, for example, show fine quality. And one of the most remarkable aspects of late-period Egypt is how it influenced the outside world. Many Greek philosophers and historians, like Herodotus in the 5th century BCE, visited Egypt, marveled at its antiquity, and recorded its practices. They regarded Egypt as a land of great wisdom and mystery, an image that persisted into later antiquity. Thus, by the time of Alexander's conquest, Egypt had experienced repeated cycles of foreign rule, but also periods of autonomy that kept the pharaonic tradition alive. Libyans became pharaohs, Nubians became pharaohs, Persians became pharaohs. But all, to maintain order, had to embrace Egyptian kingship styles and honor Egyptian deities. Cambyses reportedly even participated in the cult of Neith at Sais, according to Herodotus, though Egyptians later accused him of sacrilege. Each conqueror was inevitably shaped by Egypt even as they ruled it. The stage was now set for the final chapter of ancient Egyptian history, the era of the Ptolemies, and then incorporation into the Roman Empire. Greco-Roman Egypt, the Ptolemaic dynasty and the Roman province, 332 BCE, 642 CE. When Alexander the Great defeated the Persians and took Egypt in 332 BCE, he was careful to present himself as the new pharaoh. He founded the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, which would become a thriving capital and one of the greatest cities of the Hellenistic world. Upon Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his generals divided the empire, and Ptolemy, one of Alexander's trusted companions, secured Egypt. He declared himself king in 305 BCE, launching the Ptolemaic dynasty that would rule Egypt for nearly 300 years, 305 to 30 BCE. The Ptolemies were Greek by origin, Macedonian, but they adopted many Egyptian customs to legitimize their rule. They styled themselves as pharaohs, appearing in Egyptian art garbed like the old kings and making offerings to Egyptian gods, even as they simultaneously promoted Hellenistic Greek culture among the ruling elite. This fusion made Ptolemaic Egypt a uniquely dual society. Greek and Egyptian traditions coexisted, sometimes separately, sometimes blending. Under the early Ptolemies, Ptolemy I through Ptolemy III, Egypt was stable and prosperous. Alexandria grew into a cosmopolitan metropolis, famed for its library and museum, a center of learning that attracted scholars from all over the Mediterranean. There, Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and other scholars exchanged knowledge, producing advances in science and literature. The Library of Alexandria. Though founded by Greeks, gathered texts from all over the known world, including treatises on Egyptian history and religion, becoming a repository of ancient wisdom. Alexandria's lighthouse, Pharos, became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The economy thrived on agriculture. Egypt remained the breadbasket of the Eastern Mediterranean. And trade, Alexandria's port linked Greek, Egyptian, and Eastern markets. The Ptolemies, while often adopting Egyptian royal titulary and participating in native cults, also introduced aspects of Greek rule. They established Greek as the language of administration, though Egyptian Demotic continued to be used by the populace, and Greek immigrants settled in cities. One interesting cultural syncretism was the cult of Serapis, a deity created under Ptolemy I as a fusion of the Egyptian Osiris Apis and Greek Zeus or Hades, meant to appeal to both Greeks and Egyptians in Alexandria. This new god Serapis, alongside the enduring popularity of Isis, an Egyptian goddess whose worship the Greeks and Romans embraced widely, exemplifies the blending of religious traditions. In fact, Isis and Osiris As worship spread beyond Egypt during this era. By the Roman period, the cult of Isis had devotees across the Mediterranean, from Athens to Rome, demonstrating Egypt's cultural export. Egyptian religious speculations and mystical ideas, like Hermetic teachings associated with the Hellenistic god Hermes Trismegistus, a syncretic deity linking Greek Hermes with Egyptian Thoth, were transmitted into Greek and later Roman thought. Astrology and alchemy, practices cultivated in Ptolemaic and Roman Egypt, were passed on to the wider world in essentially the form Egypt had developed. The most famous member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and indeed the last pharaoh of Egypt, was Cleopatra VII. R 51 to 30 BCE. Cleopatra was highly educated. She spoke multiple languages and was the first Ptolemy in centuries to learn the Egyptian language. She was a shrewd politician who sought to restore Egypt's fading power by allying with the mighty Romans. Cleopatra first partnered with Julius Caesar. She famously became Caesar's lover and bore him a son, Caesarion, Ptolemy XV. With Caesar's help, she secured her throne against her brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIII. After Caesar's assassination, she aligned with Mark Antony, one of the triumvirs vying for control of Rome. The romance of Antony and Cleopatra is legendary. Together they had 3 children, and Cleopatra hoped Antony would help maintain Egypt's independence. They even formed plans that alarmed Rome, such as donations of Eastern Roman territories to Cleopatra's children, the Donations of Alexandria. In 31 BCE, however, Roman forces under Octavian, the future emperor Augustus, defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. The next year, Octavian invaded Egypt, facing capture. Mark Antony committed suicide, and soon after, Cleopatra did as well, according to tradition, taking her own life via the bite of an asp, Egyptian cobra, in August 30 BCE. With Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic kingdom ended and Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire in 30 BCE. As a Roman province, Egypt was governed by a prefect appointed by the emperor. The Romans, recognizing Egypt's immense wealth in grain, tightly controlled it. Roman senators were even forbidden to visit without permission, for fear they might incite rebellion. Under Rome, Alexandria remained a vibrant city, second only to Rome itself. Egyptian religion continued but gradually began to wane as Christianity spread in the 1st century CE, especially after 313 CE when Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity. The traditional temples of Isis, Horus, etc. still operated into the 4th century. For example, the temple of Isis at Philae was active until at least the 5th century CE, making it one of the last bastions of ancient Egyptian religion. Culturally, the fusion persisted. Many Romans were fascinated by Egyptian religion and esoterica. Emperors had obelisks transported to adorn Roman cities, and the cult of Isis was one of the most popular mystery religions in the Roman Empire. The famous image of Cleopatra VII as a glamorous seductress in later art and drama, e.g. Shakespeare, underscores how the Greco-Roman imagination was captivated by Egypt. Ultimately, Egypt under Rome, and later the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire, remained a rich land, but gradually shed its pharaonic traditions as the temples closed and the hieroglyphic script was forgotten. By the 5th century, hieroglyphs had fallen out of use until their decipherment by Champollion in the 1820s modern times. The Arab conquest of 642 CE finally introduced a new cultural and religious era. Yet, even as pharaonic civilization faded, its impact endured in the heritage of the Mediterranean and Near East. Legacy of Ancient Egypt. The legacy of ancient Egypt is profound and manifold. Few civilizations have so captured the human imagination or contributed so enduringly to world culture. For over 3,000 years, Egypt's people nurtured advances in governance, architecture, writing, art, science, and religion that would influence their neighbors and successor civilizations long after the last pharaoh's rule. Here we summarize some of the key aspects of Egypt's intellectual and cultural legacy. Government and society. Ancient Egypt pioneered the idea of a nation-state under centralized rule. The concept of the pharaoh, a divine king who is the guarantor of order, set a model of sacred kingship that echoed in later monarchies. Neighboring African kingdoms, like Nubia, Kush, adopted Egyptian styles of kingship and regalia. Even when Nubian kings conquered Egypt, they continued the pharaonic traditions. The administrative systems developed by Egyptian scribes, from record-keeping with hieroglyphs and hieratic script to organized taxation and corvée labor, were emulated by other empires. Greek historians admired the stability of Egyptian society and its laws. For instance, Egypt's long history of centralized irrigation management and agrarian administration influenced how later Hellenistic and Roman administrators governed the fertile Nile land. Under Roman rule, the Egyptian grain supply became crucial to feeding the Roman populace. Thus, Egypt's agricultural practices and calendar, with its division of the year, which the Romans adopted via the Julian calendar reform, had a direct impact on Roman policy. The very idea of a solar calendar of 365¼ days that we use today is inherited from the Egyptians. Julius Caesar's calendar reform in 46 BCE, advised by the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes, explicitly introduced the Egyptian solar calendar, Se, to Rome. In this way, the rhythm of our modern lives, with leap years, etc., owes a debt to Egyptian observations of the sun. Architecture and engineering. The architectural achievements of ancient Egypt, especially the pyramids and temple complexes, have inspired awe in every generation since. The Greeks and Romans held the pyramids to be among the great wonders of the world, and they were right. The Great Pyramid remained the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4 millennia. These monuments demonstrated advanced knowledge of engineering and logistics, the ability to quarry, transport, and precisely assemble massive stone blocks. Later cultures lacked the means or will to build on that scale, but they were certainly influenced aesthetically and technically. Egyptian obelisks, for example, were highly coveted. Rome, Constantinople, and other cities still feature original obelisks transported from Egypt in antiquity as trophies of empire. The design of massive columned halls and pylons in Egyptian temples may have influenced Greek architects who saw them. Some scholars suggest that the Greek use of columnar orders might have been inspired in part by exposure to Egyptian hypostyle halls. Though Greek styles are different, the concept of monumental stone columns in rows could owe something to earlier Egyptian norms. During the 19th and 20th centuries, long after antiquity, Egyptian revival architecture became a fad. From obelisk monuments in city squares, London, Paris, New York all have ancient obelisks from Egypt, to the Egyptian motifs in Art Deco design sparked by the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. Thus, through multiple revivals, Egyptian architectural forms have penetrated global visual culture. Writing and literature. The Egyptians were among the very first peoples to develop writing. Hieroglyphs emerging circa 3200 BCE. This writing system and its cursive derivatives, hieratic and demotic, allowed the preservation and administration of knowledge. Beyond its immediate utility in Egypt, Egyptian writing had a more distant legacy: the alphabet. The Proto-Sinaitic script, created around the 19th to 18th century BCE by Canaanite workers in the Sinai, was derived from simplified Egyptian hieroglyphic signs. This Proto-Sinaitic alphabet evolved into the Phoenician alphabet, which in turn gave rise to the Greek alphabet, and hence to Latin, Cyrillic, and many others. In other words, Egyptian hieroglyphs are the ultimate ancestor of most of the world's alphabets, including the one you are reading now. It's a stunning legacy that the simple symbols on papyrus of ancient Egyptian scribes transformed through time into the letters used in English, Greek, Russian, Arabic, through Aramaic, and even the Brahmi-derived scripts of India. Culturally, Egyptian literature, tales like Sinuhe or teachings like the instruction of Ptah-hotep, were copied and studied in later periods. They influenced Hebrew and Greek writers. For instance, there are thematic parallels between Egyptian wisdom literature and some biblical wisdom books. After hieroglyphs fell out of use in late antiquity, their decipherment by Jean-François Champollion in the 1820s, using the Rosetta Stone, opened up the modern understanding of ancient Egypt. That achievement not only revolutionized our historical knowledge, but it also gave birth to the field of Egyptology, inspiring an enduring scholarly and public fascination with Egypt's written past. Science and mathematics. Ancient Egyptians developed practical mathematics, techniques for arithmetic, geometry, and surveying, primarily to aid construction and agrarian management. They understood concepts of area, volume, and basic algebra as evidenced by texts like the Rhind mathematical papyrus. This know-how indirectly reached the Greeks. For example, Thales of Miletus, one of the first Greek mathematicians, is said to have learned in Egypt how to calculate pyramid heights via shadows. Greek philosophers like Plato and Pythagoras reputedly traveled to Egypt to study, though specific influences are debated. It's often maintained in classical sources that Egyptian priests held extensive knowledge of astronomy and geometry that the Greeks admired. Indeed, Greek science. In Hellenistic Alexandria, think of Euclid's geometry or Eratosthenes measuring the Earth's circumference, thrived partly because it stood on foundations laid by Egyptian and Mesopotamian knowledge. In medicine, Egyptian physicians were renowned in the ancient world. The Greeks recognized Egyptian medicine as highly advanced. The Ebers Papyrus, circa 1550 BCE, and other medical papyri reveal diagnostic and herbal remedies for various ailments, and Egyptian specialists, like dentists or eye doctors, were sought abroad. Herophilos and Erasistratus, Greek anatomists in Ptolemaic Alexandria, made breakthroughs in anatomy and physiology, possibly facilitated by the legacy of Egyptian mummification practices that gave familiarity with internal organs. Egyptian alchemy, emerging in the Greco-Roman period, became the origin of later medieval alchemy. The word alchemy itself comes from the Arabic al-kimia, referencing the ancient name for Egypt, Kemet, reflecting the belief that mystical transformation of matter was an Egyptian art. Religion and philosophy. The religious legacy of Egypt is far-reaching yet subtle. The Egyptian vision of the afterlife, a judgment before Osiris where one's heart is weighed for morality, introduced the idea of post-mortem reward or punishment based on ethical living, a concept that parallels later Judeo-Christian Islamic notions of divine judgment. Some scholars have speculated that Akhenaten's monotheism might have influenced Hebrew monotheism via Moses in some theories, though this remains conjectural and not supported by direct evidence. However, in the Greco-Roman era, Egyptian religious speculations influenced Greek philosophical and mystical thought. The late Egyptian idea of a supreme creator, in some New Kingdom and later texts, and complex emanations of the divine found echoes in Platonic and Gnostic philosophies. In Hellenistic Egypt, texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a syncretism of Thoth and Hermes, combined Egyptian and Greek philosophy into what became the Hermetic corpus, which had a profound impact on Renaissance occult philosophy. As mentioned, the occult of Isis Christ spread widely. Isis, the compassionate mother goddess who resurrected Osiris, became one of the most popular deities for Romans seeking personal salvation. Temples to Isis stood in Rome, Pompeii, and beyond. Even early Christianity in Alexandria was not immune to Egyptian context. The iconography of Mary nursing baby Jesus has been compared to that of Isis nursing baby Horus. Alexandria's intellectual climate, forged in part by Egyptian tradition of scholarship, temple libraries, etc., produced early Christian theologians and the Jewish philosopher Philo, who engaged with Greek and Egyptian thought. Furthermore, Egypt's monastic desert fathers, like Saint Anthony, laid the foundations of Christian monasticism, arguably influenced by the ascetic strands present in some late Egyptian religion. Art and aesthetics. Egyptian art, with its formal posture, profile figures, and vivid symbolism, was admired and occasionally imitated by other cultures. The Persians, for instance, in their palace reliefs at Persepolis, incorporated tribute bearers from subject nations. The representation of the Egyptian delegation is rendered in Egyptian profile style, suggesting Persian artists were aware of and intentionally referenced Egyptian artistic conventions. After the Napoleonic expedition to Egypt, 1798, and the publication of the Description de l'Égypte, Egyptian motifs, lotus columns, sphinxes, pyramidal forms, became all the rage in Europe, influencing the decorative arts, architecture, e.g. the Egyptian Hall in London, 1820s, and even furniture design. This Egyptomania shows how, long after the civilization itself had ended, its aesthetics continued to enchant the world. Historical memory and inspiration. Perhaps the greatest legacy of ancient Egypt is the inspiration it provides as one of the cradles of civilization. To the Greeks and Romans, Egypt was a land of immense antiquity and wisdom. It represented the idea that great achievements could echo through time. Herodotus called Egypt the gift of the Nile and was astonished by its ancient monuments. Later, during the Renaissance and Enlightenment, as Europeans rediscovered Egypt's wonders, it fueled the growth of archaeology as a science. The decipherment of hieroglyphs by Champollion opened up the direct words of ancient Egyptians, adding vastly to human knowledge of history. Today, fields like architecture, mathematics, and astronomy trace some of their earliest roots to Egyptian innovations. Culturally, the allure of Tutankhamun's mask, Nefertiti's bust, or the pyramids of Giza draws millions of visitors and continues to feature in contemporary media, reminding us of a common human heritage. In sum, ancient Egypt's legacy is a tapestry of concrete contributions, from our alphabet to our calendar, and abstract influences like religious concepts and artistic ideals. Late Egyptian religious speculations were transmitted to the Greeks, especially through the Hermetic writers in Hellenistic Egypt, and disciplines like astrology and alchemy were passed to modern times essentially as formulated in Hellenistic and Roman Egypt. Egyptian civilization, by virtue of its longevity and stability, became a wellspring of knowledge that did not vanish, but rather flowed into the broader river of human civilization. The story of ancient Egypt, its rise, achievements, and legacy, continues to captivate and inform us, a testament to the timeless human pursuit of greatness and meaning along the banks of the eternal Nile.